Hello, everybody, and welcome to this live episode of Songs of Love and Resistance. Just to make you aware again, I know I've put it in the title that there is no art for this broadcast. Whilst I won't be discussing the mechanics of abuse, I will be talking about the impact of it and the impact of a particular type of abuse. A transcript of this episode has been posted to my website, Songs of Love and Resistance, and so you'll be able to read a transcript of this there. Now, in my introduction to Songs of Love and Resistance, I briefly touched on the subject of Jean Barnier, who in his lifetime as a spiritual leader and advocate for autistic and learning disabled people, dogs, never worked with kids and animals. Anyway, as I was saying, who in his lifetime as a spiritual leader and advocate for learning disabled and autistic people abused a number of women. I briefly touched on having lived through the experience of discovering a leader within the church community to be guilty of looking at and distributing abusive images of children. And as a victim and survivor of that form of abuse, and from that perspective, the immediate spiritual concern I know and have sadly noted is for the abuser. There is what Dave Lucas over at the Ordinary Office called the Disneyfication of Jesus, as people rush to find some explain away this awful thing. Hasty forgiveness is offered for a quick fix spiritual transformation in the hope that it will make this awful thing go away as quickly as possible. It doesn't go away for the victim. Letters to a Broken Church. Nope. Bear with me. Dog. Out. Out. No. Out. Out. Never work with kids and animals. The Disneyfication of Jesus. It doesn't go away for the victim. Letters to a Broken Church was a tragically scary book because the pattern that I've described in the pews is learnt from the leadership of the church, and in my case as an Anglican, the Church of England. And whether it's because of fear or whether it's because the leadership aren't thinking about the victim, you just bear with me, I have to push my script down a bit. There we go. We're just not thinking about the victim. That combination of both of those factors allows for the abuser to proffer some form of brokenness to explain away their choices, usually his choices. And that's almost always readily accepted and prayed over. And I want to be very clear about this. Having a mental illness does not lead you to being an abuser. That is a choice, and it is always a choice. None of those things that I've described are the same thing as repentance or forgiveness, and it certainly isn't the same thing as justice. So what of the victim? In the context of abusive images of children, there is another way that the church response to abuse being perpetrated by a lay or ordained minister ends up rearing those anonymous children, and they are always anonymous. Whenever an abuser who partakes in that form of abuse is caught, the children in those pictures are never traced. They do try to trace them, initially to rule out whether or not the child is known to the abuser, but they're never traced, almost never. Those anonymous children grow up in the church or join a church in many cases. And despite its prevalence as a form of abuse, it's rarely ever discussed from the point of view of the victim. its short and long-term impacts are difficult to quantify and largely unknown. There's never, that I'm aware of, been a psychological study of the short and long-term impacts of living with that type of abuse. And for as many fellow victims of child abuse as I know only one other person who has been able to say out loud, at least to one or two friends, that they endured that type of abuse. We rarely come out and admit that we've suffered in that way. Learning to live with the camera-headed ghosts that stalk us is not easier than ignoring them as desperately as we try to. But I could no longer ignore them. When I found out that a spiritual leader and a friend that I trusted had suddenly given flesh to my deathless hauntings. Now, I'm not going to discuss the ongoing process with the re-traumatization of the lifelong process of managing my mental illness. But I want to discuss what made it harder in the church, because until the church, its archbishops, its bishops, its ministers, and so on, learn to hold the knowledge of trauma and recognition of lifelong damage in the balance of this conversation, the church will continue to make it harder for victims. The first problem, and it's one that's sadly replicated in the pews, is that people do not understand what abuse is, not how it's done, but how the abuse leaves its lifelong damage. And that for a victim in a church context, a miracle does not necessarily look like that pain disappearing forever. For many of us, a miracle would look like a church that could come around a victim and give them the space, the safe space, and the support that they will always need. I won't tell you what it's like to be abused in that way. It happened, I'm 51, it happened long before there was an internet. But I will tell you what it's like to live with having been photographed, because whilst there was no internet then, plenty of people learned how to develop those pictures from negatives. And I will never know still if somewhere in somebody's attic or basement there aren't still those pictures or negatives hidden away. That part of my life, frozen. It's captured on film. And now there is an internet when nothing ever dies. And even I can only glimpse the pain of those children who know that those pictures or films will never go away. Here's the thing. Every new pair of eyes that looks at those pictures hurts the ones whose abuse they consume and creates demand for new victims and new abusers to consume. Of all of the types of abuse out there, abuse as a visually consumable product is the most insidious. And every man, it's usually a man, caught consuming those pictures, for every one that is caught, there are hundreds, if not thousands, out there who are never discovered. And so the cycle perpetuates and feeds itself. There are no clean, happy endings in these feelings. There are only new victims, ignored, silent, and new abusers, surrounded by those seeking as much silence around the abuser as possible, so that the awful thing for them goes away as quickly as possible. It is bitterly ironic that childhood victims of filmed abuse are unseen by those whose help we desperately need and could use, and yet seen endlessly every day as abused, as frightened and ashamed, and then re-abused, re-terrified, re-shamed, day in and day out, by thousands and thousands of unseen abusers. We need a church leadership that's brave enough to allow for mess, for a lifetime of pain. For me, the miracle is that every day I choose to live despite the pain, both physical, mental, and emotional. And that I choose to live with my mental illness and do not use it as a cover for abusive choices. The abuse is always a choice. It's about power. Sex is a byproduct. And where is the leadership who can accept that? So these are some thoughts that I would like to leave you with. I hope that I have been as sensitive as possible. And obviously, I hope that I have been as contained as possible, given the fact that this is very personal for me. Now, while I've been sat here with my crochet. I'm currently doing a great big granny square blanket challenge. Over the course of 12 hours since 2 o'clock this afternoon, I'm trying to make the biggest granny square that I can, because I'm using it to help highlight the work of food banks, local community initiatives, and Bloody Good Period. You can find me over at Facebook, Ali.Wilkin, if you'd like to come along and support me whilst I'm doing that. I'll be back on Facebook at around 8 o'clock. Because this has been a personal subject to discuss, I'm going to take a little bit of an extra break before I go back to doing the crochet at Facebook. I have to manage my pain, physical pain as well. Please do support your local food banks if you are in a position to do so. And I know we shouldn't have to. I know we should have a leadership that wants to do whatever it takes to protect people it leads. We don't have that, but all we have is each other, but that's enough. If you can't give to your local food bank or Bloody Good Period, don't worry. Share your details on your local social media, on your social media pages, once a week or something. Keep people aware of the need. And if you need the help of a food bank or local community initiative or Bloody Good Period, don't be ashamed, you've done nothing wrong. It's not your fault. As I always say after prayers during the pandemic, Stay as well as you can. Stay as safe as you can. And reach out to help wherever you can. And be blessed.